Yo, what is going on, everyone? Tay here. Long time no see. It's been a while since my last video, so apologies for that. I actually went out of town last minute for my birthday, which I'm glad I did, but it definitely screwed up my release schedule for November. And I'm actually right in the middle of working on a longer video that's going to be digging into all of the new stuff that's been coming out, all the new leaks and reports that have been dropping over the last week or two regarding Avengers Doomsday. And originally I was going to talk about the Black Panther stuff in that video, but there just wasn't time. So I figured let's just turn that into its own video, drop that first, and that'll give me a little bit more time to work on the Avengers Doomsday video and make it as detailed as possible going down the rabbit hole, since I know some of you guys really like the longer videos. So yeah, watch out for that video coming out in the next few days, Monday at the latest. And in the meantime, let's just stick to talking about what'll be happening with Black Panther in Avengers Doomsday and Black Panther 3. Because just in the past week, Ryan Coogler himself has confirmed that Black Panther 3 will be his next movie and that he's currently working on that movie right now. And according to all the reports we've heard, Black Panther 3 will actually be one of the first movies to come out in 2028 as a part of Marvel Studios' next saga after Avengers Secret Wars. And there was actually a new leak or report that just dropped that comes from a new production listing that says that Black Panther 3 will be titled Black Panther: Shadows of Wakanda, and that filming is expected to begin in June of next year. So yeah, with all that said and everything set up, let's jump into it and talk about everything we know regarding Black Panther's role in Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars, and how that could possibly set up a new Black Panther to be introduced in Black Panther 3.
It definitely is a character piece.
What happens now determines what happens to the rest of the world.
Stan Lee and Jack Kirby created Black Panther in the early 60s, and he's been a staple of Marvel Comics 50 plus years.
He's an interesting character. That is going to be such a different thing for the audience on the screen.
All right, so as I'm sure most of you already know, for months now, there's been rumors that Marvel Studios will be recasting Black Panther for Black Panther 3, which, like I said, will reportedly be coming out in 2028. Now, if this is true, then we don't yet know exactly how Ryan Coogler is planning on explaining that recast yet, but there are a few different ways it could potentially happen, from it being a new version of T'Challa whose introduction could be explained by the multiversal reset that'll likely happen at the end of Avengers Secret Wars, to it instead just being an aged up but still relatively young version of T'Challa Jr., who of course we saw introduced at the end of Wakanda Forever. But to be honest, today I don't really want to talk about the specific details for Black Panther 3. What I want to talk about is what'll happen with Black Panther in Doomsday and Secret Wars. Because however the Black Panther recast happens, it seems like it will almost certainly be somehow set up by the events of what happens in those two movies, because even Kevin Feige himself has confirmed that the ending of Avengers Secret Wars won't necessarily be a reboot of the MCU, but that it will serve to be a soft reset, which I think they will use to introduce mutants, the Fantastic Four, and likely a few other characters into the Prime 616 MCU timeline. And so far, the actor that everyone is assuming will take over the role of Black Panther going forward is Damson Idris. And of course, there are a lot of good reasons to think that'll be the case. Because for one, for months now, there's been rumors that he has been cast as a version of Black Panther for the upcoming Avengers films. And this is something that's been reported by various different outlets. And when Damson Idris has been straight up asked about this himself, he's played coy about it and basically refused to answer the question. And as we know, that's usually a telltale sign in itself. And recently, Damson Idris actually showed up beside Angela Bassett in full Wakandan garb at some kind of Wakandan-themed event that was put on by Vogue in Hollywood. And again, this just seemed like another strange hint at his potential involvement with that character. However, one of the biggest hints that we've gotten at Damson Idris playing Black Panther came from some official Avengers concept art that was prematurely released earlier this year, where we saw Damson Idris as a version of Black Panther in front of a Wakandan backdrop. And I'm sure most of you remember when this concept art came out, and it was never confirmed which movie this concept art was for, whether it was for Doomsday or Secret Wars, only that it was concept art for both of the upcoming Avengers films. And I've always said that I think that the bulk of this concept art that came out was actually for Avengers Secret Wars, because most of it appeared to be set in some version of Battleworld like we saw in the Secret Wars comics. However, just a few days ago, Daniel Richman dropped another small scoop clarifying that a new version of Black Panther will indeed be introduced in Avengers Doomsday. So yeah, when we look at all of that information together, it is hard not to come to the conclusion that Damson Idris probably has secretly, or not so secretly, been cast to play a new version of Black Panther for the upcoming Avengers movies, and has probably even secretly filmed some scenes as that character on the set of Avengers Doomsday, which is likely why we see these photos with him looking so chummy with these different Wakandan and Black Panther cast members. So, if that is what's happening, and Damson Idris has secretly already filmed scenes as a new version of Black Panther on Avengers Doomsday, then the bigger question I have is, which version of Black Panther will he actually be playing, and what will his role in the plot of the movie actually be? And then lastly, will that character carry over to be a part of Black Panther 3, or will this just be an appearance for these two Avengers films? Well, back when this concept art was first posted earlier this year, I was actually able to download these images from the artist's official page before they were pulled down, so I was able to see what titles the artist herself saved these images under. And all of these Black Panther images were saved under a variation of Avengers T'Chanda. And in the comics, T'Chanda, who's also known as Azuri the Wise, was T'Chaka's father and T'Challa's grandfather. And besides the titles of these images, it's also clear that this concept art is meant to be depictions of T'Chanda, because in some of these images, he is shown wearing the same collared cape that T'Chanda wore in the comics, and we also see him with the same curved blade that T'Chanda was known for in the comics. So yeah, there's no question that at least this concept art is meant to be depictions of Damson Idris as a younger version of T'Chanda, presumably from the past. So if Damson Idris will be playing T'Chanda in the upcoming Avengers movies, then the question I have is, how will this work? How will a version of Black Panther from 3 generations ago fit into the plot of the movie? Because if everything I'm talking about is close to what's going to happen in the movie, then I actually think that he could have a potentially significant role instead of just showing up for some brief cameo or something. Because for one, Marvel Studios knows that fans have been really excited at the prospect of seeing Black Panther recast or some new version of Black Panther in these upcoming Avengers films. So I really don't think they would waste that on just a small role, especially with a fairly well-known actor like Damson Idris. But then besides that, the other reason why I think they wouldn't just use him for a small role is because besides Reed Richards and Doctor Doom, T'Challa arguably had the next biggest and most important role in Hickman's Secret Wars comic, and he was also pivotal in defeating Doctor Doom during the final battle of that story. So if it turns out that Damson Idris is going to be playing a younger version of T'Chanda in these Avengers films like we saw in that concept art, then one possibility is that he could simply just be the same version of T'Chanda from the past of the 616 universe, because we know that the whole concept of time travel does come hand in hand with the multiverse. And T'Challa was actually briefly referenced back in the first Black Panther movie as T'Chaka's father and one of the earlier Black Panthers in that lineage. So yeah, one possibility is that he could just be playing the T'Challa from the 616 universe who somehow comes back via time travel. That's possible. However, I don't think that's the most likely scenario. I think what's more likely is that he will probably be a variant from a different universe, because we know there's going to be tons of variants who will be popping up in these movies, and that way they could connect his character to some of the other variants who will also be appearing, and possibly even tie his character to the backstory of Doctor Doom. And based on the age of Damson Idris in real life and how he is depicted as what we can assume is a younger version of T'Challa in this concept art, then if he is playing a variant of T'Challa in Avengers Doomsday, then I think he will likely come from a timeline where it is currently either the 1950s or the 1960s, because this would line up with what we know about T'Chaka's rule as king in the MCU, and also the period of when T'Challa was king in the comics, which started when he was a young man in the 1940s. And so far, there are actually at least 2 or 3 1950s or 1960s timelines that we already know will be featured in Avengers Doomsday. The first one is the branch timeline that Steve created in the 1940s by going back to live with Peggy at the end of Avengers Endgame. And remember, the Russo brothers have already confirmed that Steve did create a branch timeline when he did that. And we know from set reports and set photos that we are going to see that timeline again in Doomsday, but that it will likely now be in the 1950s because Steve and Peggy now have children. So one theory I have is that perhaps T'Challa will actually come from this same past timeline that Steve is living in with Peggy. Because as far as what I've read, T'Challa didn't have like a huge role in the comics. But one of the more prominent stories we have actually seen T'Challa in the comics is when he actually teamed up with Steve Rogers back in the 1940s to help Steve defeat Hydra in the Captain America Black Panther Flags of Our Fathers comic run. And with Steve Rogers already being close friends and allies with T'Challa and the Wakandans back during the time of Phase 3 in the Infinity Saga, it wouldn't be crazy to think that Steve could have reached out to the Wakandans again for some reason after he traveled back in time to the 1940s, and that he could have become friends and allies with T'Challa back during that time, just like he was friends with T'Challa. And that maybe they could have even gone on to work together just like they did in the comics. And there have been set reports that came out not too long ago that said that Tom Hiddleston had recently filmed some scenes as Loki that are going to be with Steve and Peggy in that past timeline, where I'm assuming that Loki has come back in time to either recruit Steve or warn the two of them about Doctor Doom. So one possibility is that maybe after this happens and Steve learns about Doctor Doom and what's happening with the incursions, maybe he could reach out to T'Challa for help, and that's how T'Challa could get pulled into the larger plot of the movie and might even end up traveling in time with Steve in order to help protect Loki and save the multiverse from Doctor Doom. However, that said, I do have another theory on all of this that I think might even make more sense. And that is that T'Challa could possibly come from the 1960s of Earth 828, which is the same time and universe that the Fantastic Four are from. Because for one thing, if Marvel Studios did that, that could be a clever little nod to the history of Black Panther in Marvel Comics. Because if you're a comic buff, then you'll probably remember that Black Panther's first appearance in the comics was actually in Fantastic Four issue number 52, which was published in 1966. So how appropriate would it be for this new Black Panther to also come from the 1960s of the Fantastic Four's home universe, and maybe the Fantastic Four could be the team that kind of pulls him into the story and introduces him to the larger plot of what's happening with the multiverse in these Avengers films. Which this also ties into one of the other reasons why I think that this could make a lot of sense. Because in the comics, T'Challa was always really close with Reed and the entire Fantastic Four team, and Reed and T'Challa often worked together on different technological advancements for humanity or to save the world, depending on what the story was or whatever. And we know from the Fantastic Four movie that the Fantastic Four were said to be the only superheroes who exist in their universe. However, in the MCU, the Black Panther isn't really looked at as a superhero per se. You know, he's the protector of Wakanda. And we already know that a version of Latveria does exist in the 828 universe. So it seems completely plausible that a version of Wakanda likely exists in that universe as well. And if a version of Wakanda does exist in the Fantastic Four's universe on Earth 828, then T'Challa is the one who would almost certainly be king at that time, because T'Chaka would likely still be just a teenager at this point. And a few months ago, there was this big roundtable interview with Kevin Feige that was released just after the Fantastic Four movie came out. And in that interview, one of the things that Feige revealed is that one of the things he's really excited to see in Avengers Doomsday was the return of Earth 828 that would feature in a big way at some point during that film. And he also said that there would be a huge scene that takes place in the Baxter Building that'll include a bunch of different heroic characters all standing in the Baxter Building together. And considering that we know from the post-credit scene of the Thunderbolts that Avengers Doomsday will begin with the Fantastic Four coming to the 616 universe, this likely means that the Fantastic Four will have to return to their home universe with some of the Avengers and other heroes at some point later on in the movie. And if that's what happens, then maybe this is where we could see this new version of Black Panther introduced. And that maybe this could even be a part of the reason why they go back to the 828 universe in the first place, because they need the Wakandans' help. And if it were to be revealed that the Fantastic Four knew T'Challa and the Wakandans from their universe, then this could also help explain why the Fantastic Four would trust Shuri and the other Wakandans in the 616 universe when they meet early on in the movie, which we've heard about in numerous different leaks. And I mean, of course, these are all just theories, but considering that T'Challa is the character that would have been king and the Black Panther back in the 1960s, I do think this idea of T'Challa possibly coming from the Fantastic Four's universe does make a lot of sense, especially because then the Russo brothers could adapt elements of Reed and T'Challa's friendship from the comics into these upcoming Avengers movies, but with Reed and T'Challa instead of Reed and T'Challa. However, all that said, I should mention that there is one other very loose theory that I think also has a little bit of potential as well, and that is that maybe T'Challa could come from the same universe as Doctor Doom. Because there was a recent leak that just dropped a few days ago that suggests that Doctor Doom won't actually come from the Fantastic Four's universe, but that he will come from a branched version of that universe that is very similar. Now, I don't want to fully break down that leak because this is one of the things I'm going to dig into in the next video that I'm working on. But this is something else that I do think has some potential to also tie into the Black Panther stuff, because there is evidence that Doctor Doom will also come from a timeline where it's the 1960s, which again would line up with the same time period when T'Challa would be king. And, you know, in the comics, Doom always had a complicated relationship with Black Panther and Wakanda, where usually they were enemies, but every so often they were forced to work together against some kind of greater threat. So, you know, in Avengers Doomsday, it could be revealed that T'Challa and Doctor Doom are enemies from their home universe. Or maybe it could end up being the opposite, where T'Challa has agreed to work with Doctor Doom against this larger threat of the incursions. But yeah, based on the idea that Damson Idris will be playing T'Challa, those are the three theories that I have regarding that and how T'Challa could possibly fit into Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars. Now, personally, out of those three, I like the Fantastic Four Earth 828 theory the best, but I think the Steve Rogers T'Challa idea would also work and could be cool. And of course, the Doctor Doom stuff could work as well, but that one's a little bit more up in the air and harder to predict. Now, if this is the direction that the Russo brothers are going for with Black Panther in these Avengers films, then this would likely mean that Damson Idris will only be playing this role for these upcoming Avengers films, and that he won't be in Black Panther 3, and that Black Panther 3 will most likely focus more on developing T'Challa Jr. as the next Black Panther. And that is something that was referenced in this new report that I mentioned earlier on in the video. But, we don't know for sure what's going to happen. And if it turns out that Damson Idris is instead playing a variant of T'Challa and not someone like T'Challa, then I would say all bets are off. But if Damson Idris is going to be playing a version of Black Panther in the upcoming Avengers movies, I do think it's more likely that Marvel Studios and the Russo brothers would want to go with a variant of someone who's not T'Challa, because with Chadwick Boseman, I think they look at that character as kind of sacred and they don't want to soil it or cheapen it in any way. So yeah, I do think this idea of Damson Idris playing T'Challa in the upcoming Avengers films does make a lot of sense because of that, because we've already seen a younger version of T'Chaka in the What If series, and T'Challa is one of these Black Panthers that we know exists, but we've never seen in live action form. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video today. Of course, it didn't turn out to be as short as I wanted it to, but whatever. That's what happens with me. I just can't help myself. But if you did like this video, please leave a like or share with your nerdy friends or leave some hype points. And of course, sharing the video especially helps out a lot. And if you are new here and a fan of Marvel and the MCU, then definitely consider subscribing as well. And as always, if you would like to leave a super thanks with a question or a comment, I will be getting to those very soon. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, everyone. And like I said, keep an eye out for that much longer Avengers Doomsday video that'll be dropping in the next day or two, where I'm going to go down the rabbit hole on all the different leaks and reports that have come out in the last 2 weeks, including ones that just came out a few days ago. And yeah, I think it's going to be a good one. So keep an eye out for that. It will be out soon, and I will see you then.